The lawyer slid the envelope across the mahogany table like it was an ordinary piece of paper, and for a moment I almost believed it was. That small, careful motion, so practiced, so polite, hid the fact that the pages inside were shaped like a bomb. My mother sat perfectly poised beside me, pearls, posture, polite breath. Rachel squeezed my hand in a way that said everything and nothing. The room smelled faintly of lemon polish and grief. My father's handwriting spanned the top of the page, exact as always. His last instruction was not a benediction. It was a demand. Both daughters must submit to DNA testing before the estate could be distributed. The paper shook in my hands. A request written in a man's clear hand, no flourish, no drama, felt like a door being unlocked at the bottom of our house. That door revealed a room none of us had known we were living on top of. My name is Evelyn Hart. I'm 32. Until that afternoon, I had believed my family's private architecture to be ordinary, the kind of structure built slowly, unglamorously, by small acts of domestic fidelity. My father, Robert, was a man of lists. He kept receipts, fixed leaky faucets at midnight, and loved with the steady, unadorned kind of devotion you read about in old novels. My mother, Margaret, curated the world so that every chair sat exactly parallel to the coffee table. She made sure we were seen as respectable because being seen that way bought safety in our town. Rachel was the son of our houseboy, easy, flattering smiles that made strangers soften. I drifted behind her, a quieter shape. The two of us were sisters in habit and in history, and I never once doubted the way she belonged. Until the sheet of paper made that doubt a problem that required proof. We took the tests at a clinic 3 days later. The nurse had the kindest hands and treated us like two ordinary clients. We swapped inner cheeks, taped sample tubes, signed consent forms. The clinical efficiency felt almost cruel against the way my throat tightened with dread. For 2 days we tried to live in the in-between, like people walking on a bridge knowing the other side might look the same, but would no longer feel the same. The results arrived on a gray Thursday. A small electronic chime that sounded nothing like the life reconfiguration it announced. I opened my result first with a private hope that was foolish and desperate. Confirmation. My father's DNA matched mine solid, 99.9%. It should have comforted me. Instead, it made my heart beat loud. I turned the other sheet over with my thumb. Rachel's printout read like a foreign phrase, no paternal match. Not a slight discrepancy or an anomaly. A zero, a hole where a lineage should have been. In the car on the drive home, the paper felt heavy in my pocket like an accusation. Our kitchen seemed suddenly too small to hold this truth. The air at the dining table tightened. My mother's face did not change. Immediately. She had the same practiced composure she always wore when arranging parties or meeting the mayor. That composure is how she had built our family's reputation. But when Rachel asked the question that cut clean through the polite air, "Who is my father?" something in Mom's face faltered. For the first time, I saw fear like a physical thing. She told us in the small, measured doses of someone unpeeling a bruise. Before my father, there had been a man named Daniel. He had been young when our mother loved him, different from the way she loved my father. Daniel was reckless where my father was steady. He'd been gone from our lives long before I was born. A car crash had taken him. She had discovered she was pregnant the week after his funeral. My mother chose to marry my father rather than risk scandal. He promised, she said, that he would raise the child as his own. The word promise landed between us, saturated with guilt. Promise of what? Love, stability, reputation? My father had agreed to a life in which he would love a child who did not share his blood, and perhaps he did it out of something noble or something more complex. People are rarely pure saints, rarely pure sinners. Mostly, we are messy. If Margaret's confession had been the neat end of the story, it might have stayed private. But my father was not unaware of the details that make ordinary lives naughty. He was observant. He kept lists and receipts and an uneasy catalog of small oddities. A late-night phone call, a sudden hush on the porch, a photograph that didn't quite fit the angle of the family album. The clause in his will was less of a trap than a deliberate scalpel. He wanted the truth known, not buried. He wanted proof, not narrative. Once the test result was public in our small circle, the town's fissures began to open. There are neighbors who love you and neighbors who love gossip. For each casserole left at our threshold, the eyes that pressed through the curtains demanded detail. The PTA moms who once praised Margaret's hosting skills greeted her with hollow softness. Friends we'd expected to step forward instead flinched away. It was not simple malice. It was a discomfort that visits whenever a neat narrative asks for complexity. Rachel took the news worst of all not because biology had suddenly undressed her, but because the knowledge that everyone who loved her had done so under altered terms felt like a new kind of theft. SH moved out of the house for a month to an apartment over a bakery where yeasty air softened her edges. She needed air in a place where people would not treat her story as their entertainment. I spent hours rifling through boxes in the attic where old letters slept under dust. I found Daniel's handwriting in a shoebox of notes my mother had kept secret. Crude sketches, a press leaf, a note about a place on the river where he took her. The evidence of human love is oddly banal market receipts, slurred loyalty written on torn envelopes. The letters were not grand. They were tender in that ordinary way that makes them unbearable. Confrontation with my mother was slow and circuitous, not the cinematic shouting match you imagine. She apologized in fragments, whispered remorses late at night, live explanations that were sometimes true and sometimes excuses. I thought I was protecting you, she said. It's a dangerous word, protect, used to justify choices that shape others' identities. The lawyer told us calmly, officious as ever, that the will had no punitive intent. My father loved Rachel as his own and had arranged the estate accordingly. But his request for a DNA confirmation, the lawyer mused, was a moral mechanism. He had wanted truth in a form that could not be disputed, a ledger of body rather than the swirl of narrative. The truth shifted relationships. Some family friends retracted their invitations. Some came closer. An older neighbor, Mrs. Price, confessed she'd always suspected something but said nothing. I thought it was none of my business, she told me. Now I wish I'd been braver. She pressed a hand to my arm and did not speak again of it. We had expected scandal and found instead the possibility of repair. Rachel began to research Daniel like someone mapping a country she had only ever glimpsed. She found his name in an old newspaper obituary, a grainy photograph in a scrapbook from a local fundraiser. She tracked down a coworker who remembered him as someone who always whistled. Small details made him real. His tendency to buy too much bread, his habit of leaving flowers in odd places. Each piece of information formed a constellation that gave Rachel a kind of origin story she could hold. Months passed. Margaret sought therapy, which came with the awkwardness of a woman learning to say things aloud that she had hidden for decades. She wrote long letters she could not bring herself to send. Sometimes she would sit in the garden and look at Rachel from across the yard as if trying to measure whether forgiveness fit. My father's memory blended with the present in slow ways, an old shirt in his chest, a line he used to murmur, "Hold fast," that I heard in my head when a conversation grew too sharp. There were court filings and awkward conversations about public statements. We did not litigate feelings. The estate was divided as my father had wished, but the emotional negotiation was heavier. Who are we to each other when the roots of a life are revealed to be grafted in unexpected soil? That question required more than a judge's signature. It required narrative work, the slow, painful labor of telling and retelling so that the story would belong to the teller. We tried rituals to reconcile the loss of a seamless family story. One small thing the sisters did, Rachel and I drove to a neglected plot by the river Daniel had written about. We cleared weeds with our hands until we found a small rock that he had pushed into the mud. We placed a modest marker there, not a monument but a memory. Daniel 1960 to 1990. For Rachel, the act was a reclamation. She read his words aloud as if knitting the threads of two men who had shaped her, one who loved her by vow and one who loved her by blood. Sometimes my mother's remorse was honest and cleansing. Sometimes it recoiled into bitterness. I thought, "I was saving you," she said, sobbing one afternoon. In that moment, I wanted to tell her that saving is not the same as surrendering someone else's right to know. But grief complicates courage. Her choices have been made in fear. Fear makes even talented people choose cowardly paths. As the months unfolded, the town's hunger for the scandal softened into curiosity about repair. A neighbor organized a small talk at the library about secrecy and community. A local journalist wrote about the way families keep rooms locked and why we should ask for windows instead. We turned our private rupture into a public conversation, awkward and humble, about what it means to live honestly. The most surprising thing, Rachel asked to keep both names. On new documents, she sometimes signed as Rachel Hart Daniels. She wanted to honor the man who had given her life and the man who had given her a home. It was a small rebellion refusing the false singularity of identity and embracing multiplicity. My mother watched this with a complicated expression, proud, ashamed, relieved. One afternoon at a small service by that river plot, we stood together under a sky that had the kind of blue that makes secrets look childish. People we had expected to leave us were there. Friends came who had known Margaret's younger self and said gentle things about human error. Daniel's brother arrived from a neighboring county with scans of old photos. We read the letters out loud. We planted a tree. Rachel laid a hand on the trunk like someone anchoring herself. My father's last letter read aloud in a quiet voice by the lawyer contained the sentence that shifted the moral weight. I wanted truth, not comfort. He had spent years loving someone who was not his by biology, but his by choice. He asked us, in the end, to practice honesty so that the world his daughters inherited would not be held together only by curated facades. We did not all forgive at once. Forgiveness waited like rain for different soils. Some relationships chilled. Some neighbors stopped calling. But a different kind of weather came in, slow rains that nourished conversations. In time, Margaret volunteered at a community center teaching budgeting classes for young mothers, an act that was a kind of penance and a kind of reweaving small hands of service woven into public good. Rachel became an archivist of sorts, curating a small exhibit of ordinary letters and objects that hold lives together: key rings, grocery lists, a pressed daisy. She titled it Hidden Rooms, and people came and stood in front of a shoebox of letters long enough to swallow their assumptions. The work felt redemptive. It asked others to think about the rooms they kept locked. At night, sometimes I walk the house and look at the family photos on the shelf. Rachel's face is there in every decade: child, teenager, bride, and I see the two men in her features like layers of paint. One man gave her steadfast routines and a name. The other gave her a biological lineage and a set of small feral gentlenesses. Both mattered. The answer, I learned, was not to erase one for the other, but to hold them both and let them be complicated. The DNA test had been instrumentally blunt. It cut into the tissue of our lives and exposed the bone. But the real work that followed was tender: letters, conversations, apology, ritual. We learned that inheritance is not only currency. It is narrative. My father's will, with its final insistence on truth, finally offered me and my sister something more valuable than everything he had ever owned. It offered us permission to repair. When Rachel and I sit under the old oak by the river now, she sometimes leans her head on my shoulder and says quietly, I am both. I am whole. I squeeze her hand. You always were, I say, because now we know and can say it plainly. The envelope at the lawyer's table once felt like an indictment. We have turned it into an invitation to look, to name, to choose a life together that honors truth instead of hiding from it. We are not perfect. Some nights the old ghosts come, the sting of discovery, the ache of lost time. But the truth has weight and gravity. It steadies us now. We live by it not as a punishment, but as the steady scaffolding on which we build new rooms, open windows, and learn the messy business of being human together.